Alright YouTube, in a previous video I talked a little bit about the similarities between the idea of the right-hand path of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and so forth, most forms of Judaism, and the right-hand path idea of ritualism, and the similarities that it had with left-hand path, occult, magical ritual. But I'd like to point out some of the differences because I think, in a way, I sort of glossed that over and didn't talk about it, and it's very important that people know that there is a difference between right and left-hand path ritualism. Within pan right-hand path ritualism and pan left-hand path ritualism, the similarity is that there is still some sort of ritualized behavior intended to have a certain supernatural effect. Now, of course, in the right-hand path, they would deny that it's supernatural. They would say it's divine. They would say, you know, if I pray for someone who's sick and they're healed, it was God's power, it had nothing to do with occultism. But really what it is it is a form of occult power. They just don't realize it. They ascribe the power of their rituals to God or gods or some deity or supernatural force beyond themselves, when in reality it's coming from the psychological inner power within themselves. So the major difference is that with the right-hand path, Christians, Muslims, etc., when they're kneeling down and praying or, you know, worshiping on their rug or whatever they happen to be doing, they are, in their rituals, the dogmatic purpose of the ritual is to commune with and communicate with their God or their deity or their supernatural extrapersonal force, and ask that force to heal, to give them power or strength, to do any of a number of different things. In the left-hand path, it's not the same. In the left-hand path, there's a tendency to look within yourself, either literally as a godlike force, your own psychological power as godlike or divine in some manner, or to look at it psychologically as a form of power that approaches the idealized version of godhood, and to take that power and to use it for your purpose. For instance, within the left-hand path, a ritual might be completely individualized. It's not dogmatic and formulaic as the right-hand path would prescribe a specific ritual. For instance, if you go to a Catholic church, to commune with that God, you have to do a series of kneelings and standing up and genuflecting and all sorts of other dogmatic prescribed behaviors in order to commune with that God. Doing it improperly leads to no fruition of your behavior because you've done that behavior improperly. Within the left-hand path, there may or may not be some sort of prescribed ritual. For instance, the highly individualized people within the left-hand path may argue, while you can technically take someone else's ritual and derive power from it, and they're, for instance, pantheists, they may mix Jesus Christ up with Satan or any other plural gods from ancient history and use them as symbolic forces in their rituals. Now, in the past, I didn't understand how pantheists could do that, but from a left-hand path perspective, the symbolic nature and meaning of those god forces can be mixed up because they're not really partaking in the specific dogmatic religion. They're using the religion's symbols, perhaps for their own purposes. Thus, pantheism actually makes more sense when you really get into it than when you just look at it on the surface and say, well, how can they be a Christian and a Satanist? They're not being either. They're still a pantheist. They're just using the symbols. Within the left-hand path, the ritual may be completely individualized. The purpose may be completely individualized. The manner of delivering the energy. Now, I myself look at it as a purely psychological energy. That is to say that when you're performing the ritual, you're building up energy within yourself through a ritual which is specific to you and specifically designed to increase your energy output and directed at a specific purpose. The right-hand path would differ in that in many cases, and this is a different topic, in many cases there are certain purposes you're not even allowed to use your energy for. or that divine influence for. For instance, if a Christian were to start praying for, the church to collapse, that would probably be frowned upon. They have no specific dogmatic ritual intended for that purpose, because the very purpose itself is negative in the light and beliefs of their religion. So, within the right-hand path, you tend to be more limited as to what you can actually use the rituals for. You can basically pray for anything you want, but according to their scriptures, according to their interpretation of the scriptures, I should say, according to their own cultural background, there are certain things that those rituals can and cannot be used for. Within the left-hand path, there's no specific prohibition, and in many cases no specific laws about anything that anyone needs to follow in undergoing their rituals. So for a Satanist who's involved with the occult, it's perfectly okay if you have a deep-seated psychological need to use a destruction ritual to destroy a person or a place or a thing or so forth. That's acceptable, because it's highly individualized to begin with. Within Christianity or Islam, that wouldn't be allowed, because the idea of destroying would fall under specifically God's power. That is, God as the creator, God as the destroyer. I'm going to sneeze. I'm going to try not to. God as the creator and destroyer, and therefore to take that individual action upon yourself to be a creator or a destroyer, unless it's for a specific creative purpose that is smiled upon by the church, would be frowned upon. That's the difference between the left and the right-hand path as far as rituals go. In the left-hand path, there's no asking a deity for interceding on your behalf. You're asking yourself, or you're forcing your own energy upon a specific purpose. You may use a deity as a figure. You may use Satan, or even like Jesus or Brahma, or whatever you may want to use as a symbol. You may also use other symbology. You may use symbology revolving around weapons, or, like Satan, help me uplift my broad axe and split the skull of, the church, or something like that. You may borrow different symbols from different cultures, different deities from different religions, but you can make those rituals whatever you want them to be. Now, there are certain paths within the left-hand path. There are initiative orders, there are sects, there are entire religions that fall within the left-hand path that do prescribe some dogma around the specific purpose of ritualism. For instance, Buddhism prescribes a more or less specific path to a specific kind of enlightenment. Therefore, there will be some limits around what they believe their rituals can be intended to use and can be used effectively. There will be some dogma surrounding their rituals. But if you look at Satanism, for instance, or chaos magic or something along those lines, the limits break down, because the groups that are involved in that specific ritual force are less an organized movement, less even a religion. Satanism I don't even really look at as a religion. It's more or less a philosophy and or an occult path of thought. It really has nothing to do with religion per se, because there's really no organization in it for the most part. You can look at those groups and you can say there's far less stringent dogma surrounding those rituals because there's so little organization. It may be completely individualistic. A singular person may have a singular branch of Satanism that they're involved in. Their rituals may be completely homegrown. For instance, I make my rituals myself. I design them myself. I give them the purpose myself. I use them for my own benefit. I don't look to anyone else's book or anyone else's path or anyone else's ideals for the structure or purpose of my rituals. Does this degrade from their power? I don't believe so. I believe that essentially the only advantage to the right-hand path sort of getting together and performing a ritual en masse is that perhaps your own energy level is increased simply by being around others of the same mind. That's not to say necessarily that I think that their rituals are structured in such a way that they maximize the energy potential. I believe satanic rituals are more potent by far than Christian or Judaist or Islamic ritual. I think their rituals, simply by virtue of being so dogmatic, tend to be less involved for most of the members. See, you can look at the humans as one of two ways. You can look at them as interchangeable to be led, like the right-hand path does. Interchangeable, to be led, fallen, degraded, unable to make decisions themselves. They need guidance, they need a shepherd. They need to be directed in order to use their force. It's like thinking about a million ants being led by one queen. Each individual ant is an extremely weak individual. Altogether they have some power. They can take down an elephant. But on their own, they are completely weak. The left-hand path would be looking at a grizzled old rogue wolf or a tiger or some giant bone-crushing animal that doesn't need help in order to be an effective killer because it's working on an individual level and it doesn't require help from the outside. I would say the entire ranks of the right-hand path, every Christian, Jew, and Muslim in the world, and every other group associated with right-hand path practices, all combined could not produce the energy level of one Satanist. I do honestly believe that, because I believe that when you individually structure a ritual, if it is properly made for you and not taken from dogma from others, it will sync with your energy more effectively. It will be 1,000,000 times more powerful than anything a Christian could pray for. That's just my thought. I look around in the world and I say there's evidence of this being true. I can't prove it because it's really an abstract thought. It's a theory. I don't prescribe any specific dogmatic answer to magic. I would say magic and occult ritual can be practiced any way you want to practice it. The only difference between any two versions, in reality, is how it's structured. Whether it's, asking the deity for help or, going inside yourself or meditating or whatever it happens to be, the differences are overshadowed by the similarities in many aspects, although there are those differences, simply because from the individualistic standpoint of Satanism, and here's another important concept, from my individualistic standpoint, I can prescribe no reason why anyone else's religion's rituals shouldn't work. I can see no reason why those rituals wouldn't be powerful. I think that a Christian praying is a powerful occult ritual. The Christians would disagree and say it's not a cult. Other Satanists might disagree and say it's powerless because deities don't exist. I would agree on the deities part, but I would say the psychological ritual is still in place and still has the potential to direct inner psychological power towards a specific goal. Doesn't mean that it's maximizing it, doesn't mean it's going to be as powerful as if that Christian converted to the left-hand path and structured a ritual themselves or took some occult training and looked at magical theory. And either one is a perfectly valid path. There are some that group together, they look at specific theories on the occult and they put them into practice. And there are some like myself that are completely individualized. We make it up as we go along. We find out little bits of knowledge as we go along. What works, what doesn't work. What works by the process of cultural evolution is retained. What does not work by the cultural evolution is discarded. It's literally an evolutionary process. The occult has followed an evolutionary path. Over time, from primitive tribes ingesting various herbs and spices to get high and yelling to their gods, all the way up through the right-hand path and now, of course, the left-hand path in a modern sense. There's always been a left-hand path. It's even more ancient than the right-hand path. But modern left-hand path is a little bit different from ancient left-hand path. I mean, modern left and ancient left. They have a lot of similarities. They're related to one another, but there are some differences between the modern versions and the ancient versions. I can go into detail about that in a later video. That would be boring for most people. So that's just a little bit of a thought between the left and right hand path, ritualism, a few differences between those that I thought I needed to espouse, and but overall there are some similarities.